Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank y'all again for taking time to meet with us for this exciting webinar. We're very excited to bring back Nikki Naylor, and we have a special guest, Nancy Laberson. Thank you so much, both of y'all, for joining us today. How are y'all doing?
Doing great, Joel. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Nancy, you doing well as well?
Doing good.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us, and everybody that's out there, thank you for joining this webinar today. We're very excited to cover, unclaimed property or escheating or whatever people call it is one of those things that for some reason people don't want to talk about it, like they get nervous about it. But it is something that I feel like I've experienced over the last couple of years has become very important. It seems like the states are very much wanting to get this information, like they want to kind of audit that information and things of that nature. So we're very excited to have y'all on here, two experts in the field to discuss this. So before we get started, we do want to always cover that we do have a little disclaimer. We'll talk more about this later in depth, but just remember that even though we have two experts in the field, they're going to cover a lot of information, but we also recommend you always talk with your local and state regulators to make sure that you are following all the rules and things of that nature. So, before we get started, I would like to introduce those people who do not know Nikki Naylor. She is the vice president here of PakEnergy Accounting on the midstream side. She's an industry authority on unclaimed property in oil and gas with deep midstream expertise and responsibility for product strategy shaped by regulatory and audited realities. Wow, I did not read that. That was all off the top of my head. Uh, Nancy, she's an estate management specialist with Xtex. She has a deep subject matter expert in oil and gas estate management who has led audit response for multiple royalty disbursement entities through third-party audits. So again, thank you both for joining us. Before we get started, one of the things that we like to do here is we like to start off with a little poll. And these things are always interesting to me because, you just never know what to expect. Like I said, you have the people that are beginners, you have the people that are, they have a lot of knowledge. And to be honest, even the people that have a lot of knowledge, a lot of the rules have changed. So today's poll question, we're going to start out with how confident are you? I mean, so is this something that both of y'all have seen kind of in y'all's experience that as y'all run into different groups, whether out in the field or with your own company, that knowledge kind of is pretty different?
Yeah, for sure, Joel. We'll see a mixture of people that are just, being brought in because a company is finally maybe realizing the importance of it versus, those veterans that have been around for a while. And, they're the ones that, we love connecting with to be able to talk about all of those different operational issues that come up with unclaimed property. So definitely a big mixture within the industry for sure.
Yeah. Nancy, is this something that you've also experienced?
I think that word audit is always just a little bit scary for anybody when all of a sudden they know that whatever they're doing is going to be scrutinized by outsiders. I think that's just a little bit scary. And so I think no matter how prepared you think you are, it's still just a little bit unnerving.
This is true. The word audit is always a little scary. And so I've seen that in other areas as well, but specifically with this, because again, a lot of people, the laws are changing all the time. People don't know what to expect, so it can also be very nerve-wracking. Luckily, we have webinars like this to discuss that. And as you can see, it does look like somewhat confident. That's usually over the webinars, it's been, we have no idea. So this is kind of, I guess we're doing our due diligence here. So that being said, so Nancy, you brought up auditing, and so why don't we go on ahead and start with that, if you don't mind. There's at a high level, what are do three audits have in common?
So the three audits have, well, what we have in common, or what they had in common for us, we're a third party provider. We do the tax title and revenue for multiple oil and gas companies. And so we're sort of involved. We do all of their sheet every year, but the audit notice comes to them directly, and then we get to provide the information that we have. So that's where it's similar. And really, all the companies that we do represent have it's for oil and gas disbursement. And so they have the same thing that the auditors are looking at, which is the royalty disbursements, the void checks, suspense, and just basic general practices.
Awesome. So one of the big questions that a lot of people will get is, auditors are a part of the process. You mentioned that's kind of a nervous, you don't know what to expect. What are some common things that auditors ask early in the process?
So the first um, portion comes with a request. They're going to ask you for everything that they want to study in depth right off the bat. So they want all of your check registers, your bank statements, suspense reports, what you have reported in the past. Have you reported on time? Do you have copies of all of the suspense or the submission reports and the checks? So they ask for all of that. They ask for a sampling of due diligence letters that you've sent out, and then basically your accounts payable and accounts receivable information and ledgers as well.
Awesome. So, also, so which areas do you find have the most follow-up as far as or needing explanations?
So what I found after we provided everything with the suspense, having the dates, like production dates involved, they wanted to know why was that not as cheated if the production date was older than their cutoff date. So we had to provide backup to show that we had contact with either owners or heirs, or there was a reason for not as cheating it at the point where it looked like maybe it should have been as cheatable. And then the second thing was our practice has always been to void the checks at 1 year so that we don't have that check reporting as well, which all checks are due after 1 year of dormancy. So if a check is a year old, it's reportable, but we void them and then either reissue or put the money in suspense. So they wanted to be able to follow that line where we voided the check. Did you reissue it, or did it go into suspense and now is it being reported as production?
Got you. So, you know, it does sound like, being consistent isn't always enough to kind of justify things. There also needs to be a little bit of kind of a balance of here's the supporting documentation going along with that, not just, hey, we're doing a great job. Is that correct?
That is correct. The other thing too, that I was very thankful that we started doing a while back was putting together packets that showed everything that we had remitted and reported in the past, because the look back period is so long, with it being not only the period of dormancy, but going back even that long beyond that. So some of them, we had one of the audits went all the way back to 2008, and they wanted our reporting all the way back to 2008, which,
Yeah.
we've represented that company since 1999. So we found the old handwritten reports and we're able to provide them to them, but it was kind of, going and digging through those archived boxes and then scanning them in so we could provide them was an interesting trek.
Yeah, would this be considered like a surprising request? And if so, do you have other examples of some surprising requests that you've received over the years?
So it, well, because I've been going to the UPPO conference, not really, because
Plug.
we keep we keep hearing that that's the way, is that the look back period is longer than the 7 years, where that was always the standard. 7 years, you got to keep everything for 7 years for tax reporting purposes, and 7 years was kind of always the standard. And we started hearing that these look back periods were longer than that, and the fact that some of these audit companies were extrapolating and charging extra fees and penalties and interest based on something that wasn't there just because you couldn't provide it, um, made me very thankful that we kind of looked back at our records and were able to pull that up. So that's one thing. The other interesting thing, they wanted proof of due diligence letters sent, which it was very easy because I had copies of all the due diligence letters that we sent, but they
Yeah.
actually asked me to send one. At the beginning of the process. They said, "Will you please send this due diligence letter back to this owner, and then see if you get a response." So we mailed another one out, which I thought that was an interesting way to, I don't know, guess, to see if we were really sending out due diligence letters. I'm not sure what the purpose of that was, but it was interesting.
Yeah, it's always fun when they throw a little bit of a curveball, showing the proof and things of that nature, but they actually want an actual copy. I could see how that would be nerve-wracking. Um, so Nikki, I know that you have some experience on kind of special things that have been requested. What are some things that you've experienced?
Yeah, Joel. So I know I just want to piggyback definitely off of that look back period because, like Nancy mentioned, there are states that will basically do estimations. We know, of course, our friends Delaware are the big ones that love to do estimates. And so just, how important it is for those that are dealing with unclaimed property at a company, making sure that that upper management does know that statute of limitations. Please let us, keep the maximum number of years that we can because, like to Nancy's point, if you don't have those records, the only thing those auditors can do is basically make an estimate and extrapolate it out as if that trend continued without actually having your documentation. And so you're paying out all these penalties and interest that could have been avoided if you just would have had those records. So I know that's a big one, dealing with those estimations from the states for sure.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things I would like to do real quick is we're going to launch another poll because it's always interesting to find out where you think your organization lacks in certain areas. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. While we're launching that, I do want to let everybody know that the Q&A section is open. So as we're covering different topics here, feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A section, and time allowed, we'll try to cover some of those questions at the very end. But the chat is turned off. Make sure you put in those Q&A questions. So obviously y'all have a lot of experience. What are some areas that you've seen people have kind of maybe the biggest, as people are, putting in their experience, what are some of the biggest ones that y'all have seen as far as areas where people get kind of nailed in the audit?
I would say, Joel, like what Nancy, pointed out earlier, talking about like those dormant funds that are way past like the original production date, because there are various reasons that things can't be paid out to owners. And so, we've definitely seen a more focus on, companies really scrutinizing why they're holding those funds back. And, good standard practice is even if your company deems something that should be held back, you need to, have documentation and continuous follow-up at least annually for that. Um, we've even seen some companies go as far as if something is in litigation, they don't want to be held liable for the outcome of those funds, having to hold on to them, not, and not accidentally paying the wrong owner. And so we've heard some companies, depending on that risk and that dollar amount, doing things like even an interpleader with the court because they want to basically wash their hands of it. They're just the middle guy holding these funds.
Yeah.
And if they do the interpleader with the court controls those funds. That litigation can then be settled outside of, that holder's liability at that point. And then that way, when unclaimed property auditing does come about, that's not something that's in scope because that's been, moved over to the court liability. So I know that that's definitely a big one is just scrutinizing the those dormant suspense funds that on the surface level look like they're overdue.
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. That our practice has always been pretty much escheat everything, regardless of what the suspense code is. Because if it
Yeah.
was escheated in error, we can go back to the state and ask for it. It might be us jumping through the hoops at that point.
Mhm.
But if you don't have follow up and you just have something in suspense and you have nothing to follow up to show that you're actually working on it, I think that's where the state's going to pick that apart in an audit very quickly and say you really don't have any good reason to be holding on to that. The other interesting thing is we get operators that come to some of our purchasers and they have something in suspense. Well, some people call everything title suspense. Like it's a bad address, it's title suspense. It's, you know, we can't find the heirs, it's title suspense, and that's not truly title suspense. So we had made the decision a long time ago just to escheat almost everything, not necessarily litigation stuff that we know is being followed up on, but everything else, and then figure out if we need to request it back from the state later. And so far, it's worked really well. Obviously, with the 3 audits coming back clean, it worked really well.
That's always a benefit when it comes back clean.
Yes.
So it does look like I went ahead and ended the poll, and thank y'all for sharing that. It does look like the not sure, that's kind of high. That probably means that some people need to maybe do some due diligence and check their records and stuff like that. So that being said, Nancy, I'd like to kind of start with you. Where did the auditors focus the most scrutiny, and how does that align with what regulators are signaling today?
I think they scrutinized everything pretty equally, but I really think that it starts with that dormancy date for production, and then probably goes on to the check registers and the void checks and your process. Um, I think that being able to have everything come out of one system, it was to our benefit because when we provided the documentation, it was really easy for them to follow an audit line, seeing that, okay, I can see where your suspense is dormant. I can see where the person contacted you. I can see the documents that you have. So, everything there, I think it was scrutinized pretty equally. And interestingly enough, it wasn't necessarily the big dollars that were scrutinized. It was some of the little things that um, were just old, and they were like, well, why is this still there? So that was one of the things I found really interesting in the first audit that came up. There was a small amount, and I think it was less than $100. And they came back and asked like 3 different questions about it. Like, well, when? Who? How? So who contacted you? When did they contact you? Was it by email, phone? So it was very interesting that they didn't just focus on the big dollars. It was really everything.
And what about you, Nikki? Like, where have you seen auditors focusing and how they're signaling that today? I mean, obviously you're speaking a lot of conventions and stuff. How are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, well, and just talking about too is that voluntary disclosure agreement process. So, a lot of the states offer that today, and Delaware just did another big push where they sent out letters for companies to voluntarily, participate in their VDA process, and that is a little bit similar to what you would go through with an audit process. Obviously, you're trying to avoid penalty and interest. But in that process, there's things that you have to show, like and Nancy talked about too on the audit side with, that due diligence proof. And so, as the regulatory items are changing, legislation is changing, our industry, we're trying to follow exactly, like Nancy was saying earlier, what the auditors are really, focusing in on and versus what they're not. And with a bunch of regulatory changes, especially the last couple of years, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the call, we're definitely, starting to hone in on, okay, what do we think the auditors are going to be looking at, next time, on the next round of the audit trail. So yeah, and also to Nancy's point, with having one system to be able to go through an audit and a VDA process, is very helpful, one source system versus, I had personal experience where we weren't on one source system. And so we were having to basically pass around data in spreadsheets. And, of course, that just comes with all kinds of user issues and errors. And the audit trail is pretty much non-existent at that point, except for like an email thread of, oh, here's where I passed that data over here. And they let us know, okay, we had contact with these owners on these dates, and then they passed it back to us. And that's why we excluded them, from unclaimed property this year. Very manual, very archaic, with the tools that exist today. That should be non-existent. There are so many opportunities for companies to be able to have that one platform, where all of their data is in one place, and that audit trail is seamless to help with that.
Yeah. So you've talked about how they're focusing on, different areas. Nancy, what are some things that help some of these audits move faster? It does seem like, having a process in place, solutions that you can go back to. What are some things that you've seen that helped allow these things to move faster compared to other audits you've dealt with?
But I think that just having everything, all the reports basically at a touch of a button, was one of the things that helped a lot. So when they requested it, it wasn't a lengthy period of time before we got it back to them. I think the longer you take to get back to an auditor, the more they're going to scrutinize it. That might just be a personal opinion, but I think that might be true. So we were able to provide everything relatively quickly. They were able to review it relatively quickly, and then anything that they wanted us to follow up on, it was a matter of days that we were able to get those answers back to them. So just record keeping is huge. Having everything where you can easily find it, I think, is huge. And just being responsive to the requests really made it. So I think that they knew that we knew what we were doing, and that we were on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh,
also
sorry.
real quick, Joel, just to piggyback off that too. It's interesting asking him about that efficiency during that audit process. And Nancy, it sounds like you got back to the auditors fairly quickly, and you were able to because of the tools you had and that expertise you had. But we've heard of audit, nightmare stories that have lasted like years and years and years. And so just seeing like how efficiently, Nancy was able to handle these audits and how quickly compared to some of the other nightmare stories, it's just very eye-opening to see like things can be drug out, for years and years and years. But if you have, everything at your ready, you can get that auditor, to move on, with their lives, and then you can move on with yours, more quickly.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like I always joke like on the accounting side that if you leave it open for questions, it's going to lead to more questions. So the more information you can provide up front, it does seem like, hey, here is everything. And if they have everything without any questions, you're golden, so to speak, or at least you have I mean, there's always a chance of them coming back with something. But as you mentioned earlier, Nancy. But it does seem like if you have the ability to provide everything up front, including the kitchen sink, it allows them to ask less questions, which then kind of shuts the door on, okay, y'all are good.
Right.
Or as you mentioned earlier, having that documentation, so it's not just, hey, we got this. It's like we got this, and here's the information to support that.
And you
Um,
don't want to give them more than they ask for ever, really.
yeah.
But what they ask for in a really easy to follow manner, something that they can see, and they can see the dormancy dates, and they can see when everything happened. I think that
Mhm.
makes a big difference. But not, oh, here's everything plus my firstborn. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
So I think it's everything that they ask for, but just in a really clear, concise, easy to follow format.
Yeah. And so, kind of piggybacking off of that, it does always seem like, you go through these processes, and Nancy, you're doing this all the time. Um, there's always lessons that are learned on top of that. Are there some things that you've learned over the time of doing these?
So, yes. Uh, so when I started at XTEX 10 years ago, I didn't even know oil and gas, and I didn't know a sheet at all. And so I've learned by, um, well, it was helpful to have PakEnergy having the sheet module. That was very helpful. And then the different contacts that I've made through UPPO, that was very helpful. But what I've learned is that you never really have everything perfectly in order. But if you're consistent and you have a consistent process, then you're able to provide the information to the auditors quickly. And I think, again, that's the speed at which you can provide that to them makes them know that you got your crap together. Um,
The technical
and
term.
yeah, well, that's better than the other one that I was going to say. But but it's just a matter of you're never done learning and you're never done perfecting, because there's no such thing as perfecting in unclaimed property, because as you said, um, the states are constantly changing what they're asking for, or they're changing from going not current pay to being current pay. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of that reporting year and you're like, okay, well, what do they want?
Mhm.
And, so there's things that are always changing at the state level. So there's no such thing as perfection, but when you learn something new, then you just adapt it so that you're ready when you are called in for an audit.
Awesome. And thank you for sharing that. Because sometimes people just think that we all have it together when we're doing these things, and it's always good to know that there's all the constant learning process as you're going along with it. No one audit is the same. At least, not my experience is not as much as y'all's, but it does seem like they're always a little different, and there's always a lesson to learn. Speaking of learning lessons, Nikki, one of my favorite things to hear you talk about is updates to regulatory stuff. And I know that we have some detailed stuff we're going to go into, but without going into specifics, can you kind of level set to our audience some of the things you're seeing as far as changes in unclaimed property and escheating?
Yeah, sure, Joel. And we've kind of alluded to that throughout the call so far, is just, there are certain things, that are looked at by an auditor that they'll focus on, up to date, up to now. But to Nancy's point, with those changes that are happening, you just have to be aware and at the ready to be able to adapt, like she said, adapt to the change, because then the next time, heaven forbid, right, or when you get audited again, um, that auditor could be looking at new things that have been implemented now from the states that have, additional requirements that have definitely come into play in our industry in the last couple of years. So I know we're all kind of out on the lookout of what exactly that's going to mean with some of these definitely relevant but different changes that we've had the past couple of years.
Awesome. And so it does look like we have some updates on owner death accelerated dormancy. That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is that, this might not be new in the unclaimed property space as a whole, because of course there's other things that go to unclaimed property but besides just oil and gas. Um, but now that it's really being the legislation changes are really starting to be relevant to our industry. Now we're kind of taking a closer look at what that's going to mean, from not only having to maintain different dormancy periods depending on that state and that owner's uh, death status. Um, that that's going to not only have operational compliance issues at the beginning, right? And so Nancy already did a plug for UPPO, and I know that they have a task force specific to this change, just because there's so many states now on this train of wanting to implement what they're calling an accelerated dormancy when an owner is deceased. And each state is interpreting and making those updates to their own liking. And so now we've got, some that are actually, the owner's date of death, or a state will say, well, it's the knowledge of that date of death of that owner. And some of them are, accelerating their dormancy from a 5 or a 3 year now to a 2 year. And so I know the states that have passed, there's like 5 or 6 that have now passed some legislation for it. Uh, they're not technically those heavy oil and gas states yet, and so maybe the risk isn't quite there yet, with the oil and gas industry. But as soon as some of those bigger, heavy oil and gas states start passing similar legislation, I think it's going to be looked at even harder. And just trying to keep up with that from a operational standpoint, but then also a audit standpoint, in the future, just thinking about, okay, now what are those new data points that I'm going to have to make sure that I'm capturing, or not capturing, right, too, because then you're almost like, well, if I have this information, now I have to actually do something with it, and then the auditor can find, oh, well, you had this, why didn't you accelerate, their dormancy? So just, a lot of unknowns at this point as far as the auditing goes for these new updates that have happened the last couple of years with the owner death accelerated dormancy. And another thing that's changing too, along with the unclaimed property reporting, is, we've been using what we call the NAPA 2 format for years and years and years. And that has some limited information. And while the long-term goal of the NAPA 3 format that will be coming most likely now next year, the long-term goal is to have like more information, so it does help like the claimant side of things, right? So an owner trying to be reunited with their funds, there's going to be some 21st century data points like email addresses and things like that, where speaking from personal experience, right? You move probably more often than your email address changes. And so just being able to leverage those new data points, it's going to be great for that claimant side. But on the holder side, there's going to be a lot of operational data points that we weren't necessarily required to report to the
Yeah.
state on our reports. And so this new owner death accelerated dormancy, there's going to be like owner death date, and then there's going to be things like when you send out your due diligence letter, you're going to have to stamp a date in there. The last contact date you had with an owner, you're going to have to put that in there. And so now you're having to make sure, even though like I think I'm compliant, my data might say otherwise, right? If you're not up to date on keeping track of those different data points. And so that's just opening up a new, opportunity potentially, right, for those auditors in the future, because now they're going to have more information at their ready that have to be included on those reports when that NAPA 3 format does get rolled out, potentially as an optional format next year.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, lots of changes. And so yeah, just just trying to make sure that people are keeping up to date with those, because there are so many new changes that our industry wasn't necessarily having to pay attention to in the past. Again, maybe with the owner accelerated death date, it hasn't really hit those heavy oil and gas states yet, but it could, because now we have 5 or 6 states that have already passed legislation for this. And so, as we've seen with other things like current pay, those states really jump on that train, to get those funds sooner in any way that they can, right? So that this is another opportunity for them to do that.
Yeah. So it does look like we also have some updates with Illinois and Vermont. Would you like to briefly talk about that as well?
Yeah, those also are included with that owner accelerated dormancy if they are deceased. And so yeah, just going, showing all the multiple states that have now, jumped on that bandwagon. Just again, not only are you having to keep track of dormancy periods between each state, but now you have multiple dormancy periods within one state that you have to, keep track of. And so, yeah, just showing that they're not actually making it easier from an operational standpoint. They're making it harder. Like there's no unified, RUPA going on here, with the revised Uniform Unclaimed Property Act. Like that's pretty much going out the window now at this point, I feel like, because the legislation changes are so unique to each state. It's like they're not making it easier now, they're making it even more complex, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they want their money.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That is so
I,
true.
I think I think that means that also during the audit, um, they're going to look more closely at the suspense codes. And so it's going to be, if you have everything lumped into a title suspense code, they're going to want to know, well, what is the title? What is the title requirement? So I think that you're not going to be able to use just a suspense code it generally anymore. I think they're going to scrutinize the suspense codes for oil and gas a little bit more closely because of that. And I think it's going to be really spurred on by the accelerated dormancy from death. Actually, that they're going to be looking at that more closely.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Nancy, because a lot of companies do have like a suspense code for deceased, right? And so if you have those owners in a deceased suspense code, but you don't have a date of death for them and didn't accelerate their dormancy if they're in those states, what now, right? So yeah, just a lot of new, interesting things to pay attention to.
Always fun with the federal government. Why not change up to 99 stuff at the same time we're doing all this unclaimed property? Why not? We'll make it fun. Fun for everybody.
Right. Yep, they sure like to do that. Changes all in the same year for sure.
100%. So, we've talked about, experiences that y'all have gone through, what you're seeing changes in regulations and things of that nature. So now as we kind of wrap up all of these things, Nancy, I'm going to start with you. You know, some people may go, I don't know where to start. So if you could maybe give a few bullet points that you think to get someone started, what are some items that you would think is the most important for them to start with?
I think just taking a look at your overall records. What suspense do you have? How old is it? Why is it there? What are you doing to follow up? What kind of activity are you doing? How are you trying to find them beyond the due diligence period? So you don't have to wait to send a due diligence letter to find these owners. Our division order analysts are constantly working our suspense. The owners that are in suspense, why are they there? What can we do to find them? What can we do to find their heirs? So, being proactive rather than reactive, I think helps a lot. And just knowing, so you kind of know what your suspense is and where you're at. And, so taking a really good close look at that and not just thinking, oh, this is something I have to do is cheat this. Really think about what your obligation is, and then what your obligation is to the owner as well, trying to find them, um, making sure that you are staying up on your void checks. Don't let them go more than a year. Stale dated checks are looked at. I remember when I first started this, and I went to a presentation on unclaimed property, and their example was a payroll check that went uncashed. It was a $100 payroll check.
Yeah.
And by the time they were done with this audit, it ended up costing them like thousands, almost $100,000 for this check because they
Yeah.
not only looked at that, then they looked at everything else and then they extrapolated beyond that period. So just really staying on top of things, I think, is the most important thing. Keep your packages, know where they're at, make sure that you have everything together so it's easy to give to an auditor, but so that you have it and make sure you can double check yourself and did you do what you were obligated to do as far as reporting to the states? I think that you sleep better at night if you know you've done everything you can do to stay compliant.
And Nikki, what about you? What are some things that you would tell people to do?
Yeah, I think especially if you're just like starting out, trying to make sure, that your data is compliant. One of the big things that we see is that there are companies that don't actually have like a stale check process implemented. And so, that's definitely one of the big ones too, is implementing that, where if you have like a void after however many days on your checks, um, or if you don't, you should get one, and then you should, follow that timeline of, okay, we've sent out these checks. It says void after 90 days. It's been 90 days, so we need to do a mass void of our stale checks so that they go back into suspense, or we reissue them. So that's definitely a big one, especially if you're just starting out. And then like Nancy said too, on reviewing your suspense and things like that, like we talked about earlier, those ones that are in different legal categories of, did we have follow-up this past year? If not, you need to, just make sure that you're implementing a cadence of following up on those items that your company deemed that it needs to hold those back for whatever legal reason. And then also, just implementing and having like an unclaimed property process, like standard, that's like documented, because auditors and VDA processes love to see that as well, just to show that you are doing your best to get those funds reunited with the owners, and escheated to the state in a timely manner.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a little brief pause for a second. I am going to open up the Q&A section. So if there's any questions that people have over anything that we've talked about, please just type it in the Q&A section and we'll go on ahead and get to those. While we're giving people an opportunity to, type in their question and whatnot, um, if y'all had to give a takeaway, and I'll let you choose whoever wants to go first, if one takeaway from this webinar or from your experience, what is something that you would say?
Well, I would say, just being able to understand like how audit ready you already are, just so you know like where you need to go from here, right? That first step is figuring out where you think you're at today, and then you'll understand what you need to change to then, be audit ready in the future. And I know later on in the slide, we'll have a QR code where you can scan it to be able to take basically an audit ready scorecard, where you can determine, what your audit readiness is based on your practices today. And then based on that, you'll understand, okay, um, these are my pain points. These are the ones we need to work on going forward. And, that way you'll have that first step of being audit ready when it does come, because it will eventually.
I think in addition to that, having a village, so knowing that there are people out there that you can contact and ask questions, having extra people that maybe have done a little bit more than you have, and or not, but even that they're in the same boat as you are, and you can talk to them about what's happening and what have they found worked and what didn't work. And so I think those are the things that just knowing that you're not alone and that you can ask questions, that helps a lot. And then being confident with the information that you have and can supply, just knowing that you're never going to be perfect, but being confident that what you have is a really good starting place.
Yes. And it's great that you say that, Nancy, because at the end of this webinar, we will have both Nikki and Nancy's contact information as well as mine. I LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn all over the place. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll have that available. And I know that both Nancy and Nikki would love to discuss any topics or answer any questions that y'all have. We do have a few questions that came in, so if y'all are okay, and we'll just whoever wants to answer. I love these questions because I feel like they're on every every unclaimed webinar we've done. So the first one, oh, and by the way, these are all anonymous. So if you put a question in there, realize they're all anonymous. When it comes to the application of dormancy period statutes, which state's regulations takes priority? The last known state of residence of the owner or the state in which the corporation resides within?
Yeah, so we didn't really go over the basically the 101 priority rules. But if you're familiar with the priority rules that were set after the Supreme Court ruling on Texas v. New Jersey back in the 60s, where states were trying to fight over who was actually entitled to those funds, it basically set the priority rules as priority one is it does go to that owner's last known address state. And if you don't have an address where you don't know where that owner last resided in, then it will go to your state of incorporation. And then that also goes with any jurisdictions that might not have unclaimed property reporting. It would then go to your state of incorporation. Nancy, anything else to add to that one?
Foreign properties or foreign owners are the same, goes to the state of incorporation. Um, I think they used to do a little bit more of you could report it all to one state and they kind of shared, but I don't think they do that so much anymore.
Yeah, that
So you
reciprocal
all,
reporting.
yeah, the reciprocal. You really want to go to the state of last known address. According to the states, when you hear them speak about it, it's because it's easier for them to reunite their money with the owner because they're going to look in the state of their last known address sooner than they're going to look into the state of an incorporation of a company that's holding their money.
And if somebody, let's be honest, let's say they're nervous about reaching out to you all. I mean, y'all are super nice, but let's say that is there a place where they could easily get this information online or like a website they could go to that you could recommend?
The NAPA website has each state and it has their rules and regulations. Most of them have a link to the state's website for unclaimed property. So if you go to the NAPA, I think it's napa.org. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it is. And it does have a link to each state. And then you can go to the state's website and read about what their rules and regulations are. So that's probably the best one, easiest one to access, I think.
Awesome. We had another question. Does the period start with the production date or the date we received funds from the purchaser?
So, that first ready, set, go date is going to be that production date. I know there are some states that have what they would call, statutory interests that fall within that, from that production date, the royalty owner has to be paid within like 60 days. And that's typically, maybe when the operator receives it from the purchaser and then passes it on to the royalty owner. But as far as dormancy triggers, it's going to be that original production date because it's like ready, set, go from that production date out to payment for the owner for not only unclaimed property, but statutory interest rules that some states have. And then, of course, as you have owner contact and things like that, there are other things that will reset that dormancy trigger. And that's another thing we didn't really talk about with audit, but that's another thing you would make sure that, you're wanting to track because on the surface, it could look like those funds were past due, but really you had contact with that owner recently, so that will reset their dormancy period. So those funds shouldn't be sent to the state at that point. And so that's really how that dormancy trigger works. Anything else to add, Nancy?
A really good example of that is if you have one owner who sold their interest to another owner, and it included past production or the effective date was older than the current date, the actual dormancy period would start with the date of the transaction of the actual transfer. So that's one thing you need to make sure you're keeping track of as well. So that's what's hard in oil and gas is the dormancy date can be all over the place, and it's based on contact. So if someone's transferring their interest, that's contact. If they cashed a check and then there was no production for a while, they cashed a check later. That last cashed check date is actually a dormancy trigger as well. So there's a lot of different dormancy triggers. There's also PPAs that can make it so that it looks like you have older suspense than you did. So there's all kinds of different things. Oil and gas is called the lone wolf for a good reason, I think. And when they're referring to it, it's not quite the same as reporting unclaimed property for other entities, but oil and gas definitely has its challenges as far as dormancy date goes.
100%. We do have one last question before we wrap up, unless another one pops up. The question was asked, what are you seeing with VDAs? Are they being used more, and how successful are they generally? And just for people that maybe are newer, y'all mentioned earlier, I think it was Nancy said that you hadn't really done this before. For people that don't know what VDAs are, could you explain that? And then, whoever wants to answer the question can answer it.
Yeah, so I had personal experience with voluntary disclosure agreements is what that stands for. And the success rate was amazing, but it is an extensive process, but it is worth it. And basically, that's an opportunity for you to reach out to the state proactively, especially if you know that you haven't been compliant and or you've done a merger and acquisition, and all of a sudden you have things on your books that were not compliant because the due diligence process, they didn't even think about unclaimed property, which is can be typical in
Yeah.
that circumstance. But yeah, basically you're working with each individual state. Some states have like a formal VDA, some it's more informal. But the outcome, is trying to mitigate those penalty and interest. And I will say, we were very successful in those passes that we did. And, a lot of the states are really willing to work with you when you come forward proactively. Depending on where you're incorporated, might have the most scrutiny. So if you're incorporated in Delaware, it is a lot more hoops you have to jump through to show different documentation so that they won't do that estimation. So just be aware of that. Depending on the state you're incorporated in, there could be just some more hoops to jump through there. But yeah, and once you've gone through that VDA process, the likelihood of you getting audited in the future is much smaller just because they've already gone through that VDA process with you. I don't know if it's 100% not going to happen. I know when I was there with the VDA process within 10 years, it still hadn't happened. We still hadn't had an audit. So, I mean, I think that's pretty successful as far as an outcome with that. So definitely encourage companies, if you know you aren't compliant, to proactively reach out to the states to engage with those VDA processes. Don't just all of a sudden start reporting because that will potentially trigger an audit.
Yeah.
My experience with VDA, we had one of our clients who it was a brand new company, but the wells that they purchased were from another larger company, and it had a lot of old suspense, and so the purchase came with all that old suspense. So the company that we represented had never ever filed any kind of unclaimed property because they were new, but there was dormancy dates on the old suspense that were very, very old, like in the 1990s. And so that was our recommendation also to them, was to do VDAs. So I think it was 5 to 10 VDAs for different states, and all of them very successful, no penalties and interest. And then from then on, we just reported annually like we were supposed to. So it's a really great way if you've never reported and you're wondering, how do I jump onto this bandwagon without getting my hand slapped? That's what you do. You do the VDAs, and that way you say, I know I haven't done this in the past, but I want to start. And so that's why the states, I believe, offer them, is so that you can get caught up and you can become compliant and stay compliant. I think the statistic that I heard at the last conference was there are only 10% of the people who are reporting unclaimed property that should be. So 90% of companies that should be reporting unclaimed property aren't. And so if you find yourself to be one of those, a VDA is a great way to jump into the game.
I love that. Well, thank y'all for answering. I know it's always a little nerve-wracking when questions are thrown at y'all, and y'all did great. So thank y'all for doing that. So Nikki, you'd mentioned the QR code a second ago. Would you like to speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure, Joel. It's just, it's a free resource that we're offering to you guys. It's basically, again, if you're not sure where you stand with your next steps of being audit ready, it's just a good resource to have to be able to kind of set that standard. And then now okay, these are the areas that I need to improve on for my go forward process to be able to be ready for when that audit does happen.
Awesome. So I'm gonna leave the QR code up there for just a second. I just want to say also one of the things Nancy mentioned earlier was having the ability to kind of process unclaimed property, have it tracked in a system. PakEnergy has a great solution that tracks your unclaimed property dates and times. We have a whole suite of products as well. So if you're not familiar with Pak, and our suite of products. We would love to talk to you. Again, my information will be at the end. If you want to talk to somebody who's not technically affiliated with PAC, I'm sure Nancy would love to have that conversation with you as well. But we'd love to just discuss kind of what your internal processes are and see if maybe we have an answer here at PAC to assist you in those things. That being said, we are wrapping up the hour and we want to be very respectful of everybody's time. So Nancy and Nikki, we know y'all are super busy doing all the things y'all do, so thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise.
Yes,
You're
thank
welcome.
you, Joel.
Awesome. We are going to leave this up, as I mentioned earlier, so that way you can take down the information. We also, if you happen to miss the QR code, reach out to one of us and we'll make sure we get you that information. And thank you all again for joining us. Y'all have a great day. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. We have a ton of great webinars, great information. We may even bring Nancy back. She's been so good today. We're going to just bring her back. Maybe she'll replace Nikki. I know it'll never happen.
No,
That'll never. But make sure you follow us on LinkedIn and y'all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
thank you.